Ahoy, you filthy swines! Get in here, have a seat. I'm going to read some news. So I've lived quite a while over in the UK, and the politics that goes on over there is very different to the politics that we have in the States. I guess they superficially want to kind of appear to be the same. They're trying to go for, I would imagine, a federal Europe, and they're trying to emulate the United States, but they're not quite there because the formation of the United States is very different to the formation of Europe. The US started as a homogenous culture, mostly from the UK, and then spreading out to other European nations. So there was a seed of culture that grew, and then other different cultures came in, added to it, and built upon that culture over the last couple of 100 years. Whereas Europe has always been fragmented, and they're trying to glue this patchwork of different nations together to be one. It's not the same root, and also it's difficult to imagine that holding together as well as the US. So this dream that I imagine a lot of federal Europeans have of pulling their union together into one nation like the United States is pretty difficult to pull off. But anyway, this article on Politico, written by Camille Jizz. Is her name Camille Jizz? I'm sorry, love. That is your name. Gabrielle Gavin, she's a woman, she's a man, and Laura Kayali, the least surprising of all the names. Brussels, Donald Trump's attack on Europe as decaying with weak leaders has renewed the EU's push to get serious about diversifying its economic, military, and political ties, and cutting reliance on the US, which I imagine is a very good thing. Thinking the other day about how Trump played their contributions to NATO to our advantage. Not that we should have any problems with NATO, but the underfunding of NATO from member states was an issue, which he seems to have dealt with, which is good. So this is an encouraging sign, I think, of Europe actually taking their own initiative. Leaders at a summit in Brussels on Thursday are supposed to sign off on European support for Ukraine, defense spending, and measures aimed at boosting Europe's competitiveness over the US and China. But while Europe is determined to go it alone after decades of leaning on its friends across the Atlantic, nothing's that easy. While the American president's criticisms have persuaded the EU's leadership that making progress on a stalled trade deal with Latin America, Mercosur, what the hell is that, would be the best way to showcase its political heft in a region that is increasingly courted by China and the US, France and other countries are holding out. The answer to the US on Europe's decay, the answer to the US national security strategy, to the US trade deal, the answer to China, to Russia, to the increased transactionalism between powers is Mercosur, a senior EU official told Politico. What the hell is Mercosur? Is that a French-ism? What is Mercosur? Mercosur, a South American trade bloc established by the Treaty of Asuncion in 1991. So, a Southern American Union. I didn't know that. Sealing the agreement would require EU leaders to confront entrenched resistance in France and growing doubts in Italy, where hostility to the deal has permeated the entire political class for years, over fears it could expose their influential farmers to a flood of cheaper Latin American produce. For proponents of the agreement, boosting links with the Mercosur bloc, which groups Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, is a key test of whether Paris really wants Europe to stand on its own after years of being the loudest champion of Europe's sovereignty. So they're interested in Europe's sovereignty over federal sovereignty over the member states, I guess. And also, why is Europe interested so much in South America? What? You know, it's kind of across the Atlantic and down a bit. It's westbound and down. Africa is nearer to Europe than South America. A golden opportunity. A group of governments led by Germany and Spain argue the moment has come for France to back up its talk of sovereignty, warning that Paris's blockade of the Mercosur deal is undermining Europeans' push to stand on its own. To those countries, Mercosur represents a golden opportunity for their companies to expand into new like-minded markets away from China or the US. We are pretty much convinced that if there is no possibility of a deal this week, then it's probably going to be dead, said a German government official. We see that the deal already starts unraveling. And after years in which Paris championed Europe's push for strategic autonomy, They warn France seems unable or unwilling to reconcile that ambition with its long-standing rejection of the Latin American deal. Again, I don't understand why it's anything to do with them, but here we go, moving on. For Paris, this stance aligns neatly with its vision of strategic autonomy. The EU should do everything possible to protect its producers and uphold its standards, said Georgina Wright, senior fellow specializing in France, EU and US relations to the German Marshall Fund, a think tank. It's a whole tank of brains thinking away. In France and Poland, the deal is so toxic across the political spectrum that reassurances from the European Commission have fallen on deaf ears. This despite efforts by Brussels to come up with additional cash for farmers and to impose tariffs if cheap Brazilian beef undercuts domestic farmers. Paris is worried that the deal will fuel public anger towards the political establishment, with the far right, oh not those chaffs, not them again, leading in opinion polls for the country's presidential elections in 2027. Problem there is they are dead set against not pandering to any conservatism at all. So even though it's popular in Europe, they have decreed that they will instead denigrate it instead of hopping on that bandwagon. They could jump on board and try and guide conservatism, but they seem to be dead set against that, I guess, because it encourages national sovereignty, which is not what the European federalists want. That's just that, I suppose. But this stance is seen by a majority of member states as counterproductive at a time when the EU is looking to diversify its trade relations to respond to pressure from the US and China. France is seen as uncompromising, refusing to budge even though it is in the minority. Wright added, fear of defense power grab. But it's not just about trade. Increasing concerns about US unpredictability and the scale of Russian aggression are driving European countries to take charge of their own security. The European Commission is pushing member countries to sign up to so-called flagship defense projects and pool resources on key areas like drones and anti-drone systems. They want the drones, they don't want the drones. However, EU heavyweights such as France and Germany have reacted skeptically to the proposals since they were unveiled over the summer. Paris and Berlin worry the moves would undercut their national priorities and give too much power to Brussels over defense policy. The flagship projects do not feature on the last draft summit conclusions, seen by Politico, but while Paris said they were not on the agenda Thursday, Nordic countries are still hoping to salvage the plans. Well, Norway is not exactly in the EU. I don't exactly know to what extent that's true, because the UK is not effectively in the EU, but they are, in my opinion, inevitably going to fall back into the EU unless a new government comes in and starts to honour Brexit. I don't think that's going to happen, to be honest. I think they're biding their time. If you look at all the laws and stuff that have been unfolding in the UK, they are very much in line with European style, such as getting rid of jury trials and allowing the constant traffic of these supposed refugees. Two EU officials said the bloc's executive has been working to reassure them that Brussels isn't overreacting, and that they will still have clear control over their assets and spending. The difficulty in signing off on more collaboration, even as Russian fighter jets and drones breach EU airspace, that sounds worrying, worries many that aren't moving fast enough against hostile states and competitors that act by executive fiat. Deal on the line. Nowhere is the EU's difficulty in striking out alone clearer than in the quarrel over using frozen Russian assets to underwrite $210 billion loan to keep Ukraine's finances afloat. Whether Trump is fueling Europe's strategic autonomy drive or holding it back, decision time is fast approaching on key issues. We can have discussions at evenings, at weekends, through the night, as second official said at preparations on Thursday's summit, but when an issue matters this much, we really don't have any option but to get on and do it. So this wonderful article was vaguely about the EU trying to broker some kind of trade deal with the Southern American equivalent, which is kind of odd because there's lots of divides between very socialist and more free market economy type nations in Southern America, even more so than Europe. So I don't know. Is there a possibility that Southern America could actually bind together properly. I don't think anytime soon, but yeah. One of my biggest worries about Europe is they're not embracing conservatism. So they're not finding a solution to bind themselves together that is in line with what the population wants, which is quite volatile, really. The population doesn't necessarily want to be controlled by a federal Europe, but the federalist Europeans are pretty desperate to push that through. So their only option seems to be throwing money at vilifying conservatives instead of picking up some of the things that they like. Like, for instance, why would you not want to just slow down a bit on the immigration? Just let that kind of calm down a little bit, let people get to know each other. It's strange. But in order for Europe to function as a union, they should really make sure that its member states want to be part of the union and aren't kind of locked in formation with the rest of Europe just because. But there we go. Europe's a funny old place. It's half busting apart and half being maniacally forced together, and I'm not exactly sure which is the best outcome. I would say my hope for global nationalism, for respecting countries' culture and identities and working together is the best solution, but they don't seem to be going down that route. So there we go. That's that. That's going to be it for now. Thank you for joining me. Make sure you hit the like button if you're so inclined. If you like me, like and subscribe. That's right, Oinker, yes. And come back. That is it, though. And the only thing I have left to say is Pigwig out.
Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oink, oink, wee, squeal, snort, snort, oinkity, squee. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, wee, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinkity, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 wee, 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 oh. Snort, snuffle, oink, squee, squeal, wee, snort, oinkity. Oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, wee, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, wee, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinkity, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 wee, 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 oh. Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, wee, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, wee, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinkity, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 wee, 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 oh. Squeal, squeal. Snort, snuffle, oink, re, squeal, re, snort, oinky. Oinkity, oink, 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 snuffle, wee, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, wee, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, oink,